We've got football finance expert Tom Cannon up on the Skype wall. Professor Tom Cannon, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank yourself.
We are very well, but we're a bit puzzled about Manchester United's so-called debt or structured debt. Can you throw some light on it for us, please?
Well, they owe something like £450 million, and it's expensive debt because they're paying quite large interest charges on it. And of course, that's one of the criticisms of the fans, of the fact that the interest charges reflect actually the fact that the Glaziers have basically been taking money out of the club. Now what's happening is that they're reducing that by about 200 million. Well, they're going onto the US stock market, selling about 10% of the club for about $330 million or 200 odd million pounds, and basically using half of that, about 105, 110 million pounds, to reduce debt. And the other 100 million basically is going back into the Glaziers.
Well, I think that's a fair assumption of what's going on, but you'd have to say it's their club, it's their company. Since they took over the club, they've won an enormous amount of trophies. They've purchased an enormous amount of players. They're still one of the biggest spenders in the Premier League. The fans have a point about the leveraged debt, and of course you'd like to see a club like Manchester United with no debt. But they're only selling off 10%. They're selling off shares which aren't voting shares, so no one could get any control over the club whatsoever. They are reducing the debt, but they're reducing as much as they can, as they did a year ago, the PIKE debts, which are the most expensive ones. So the interest...
Yeah, sorry, that's what they want to do. But no, you're quite right. I mean, it's their business. I mean, that's been the Glazier's position throughout. It's our business. In a sense, their view is, well, what we decide is what we can do. And to some degree, they've been supported by the executive. And, you know, there's no question that Manchester United is a great business. I mean, it's got the perfect business model in football. It's got roughly 100 million in TV income, roughly 100 million in gate income, and roughly 100 million in merchandising and other incomes. They've globalized, so they probably have a fan base in Asia which is as big as the fan base of any other club in any other sport in the world. So you're talking about actually probably bigger than all the other clubs in the world's fan base in Asia. So it's a great business, but the big question is whether they can compete with the likes of Manchester City and Abramovich in Britain, with the likes of PSG in France, and some of the other new big kids on the block.
Well, there's two answers to that one. First of all is that, you know, they're a victim of their own success, because when they bought Manchester United, they purchased it at 600, 700 million pounds. I think the final bill was something like 800 with all the legal fees, etc. What's it worth now? It's worth at least double, if not £2 billion. So they're doing something right. So they're almost a victim of their own success, because it's so good the way Manchester United have been under the Glazers in terms of commercial enterprises. They've actually expanded their global enterprises to Asia and China and other countries. They can't actually find a buyer who can afford to pay the £2 billion that it's probably now worth. And I would imagine if someone came in with £2 billion, they would sell it, because they would make a phenomenal profit and move on. But they are enjoying it as well. You know, to say they're not football fans, you know, the Glazer boys are football fans. Explain to me what is actually wrong with Manchester United in so much as Manchester City, PSG can throw money at players. They can spend £250,000 a week on footballers, or 30 or 40 million pounds in transfer fees. The knack of getting a good football team together is having a good manager who selects the right players. It's not necessarily just buying the best or the most expensive.
Absolutely, and Manchester United have had a fantastic conveyor belt of young players coming through, and they still have good players coming through. Alex Ferguson is probably the smartest at cutting good deals in the transfer market. I mean, how much could Wayne Rooney be now? We got him seemingly now as a snip from Everton at 20 odd million. So the truth of the matter is that he is a brilliant manager. But earlier on, you pointed out the first issue, which is that basically what happens after Ferguson. Will Manchester United, if, for example, it was Mourinho, be able to match his desire to spend big? But there's no way you're going to get Mourinho in without giving him not quite a blank checkbook, but not quite off it. And the other thing about it, of course, is what you were talking about in terms of the business. The business was on that trajectory anyway, for growth. The business was on a growth trajectory before the Glaziers came in. And that growth has continued. You know, the executive team hasn't changed that much. That trajectory was there. But I would guess if I was speaking on behalf of the fans, which I'm not, because I'm not a United supporter, I would say, well, actually, you would possibly be talking about a profit on the turnover, which might be slightly less, but you know, the year that they were bought, United were producing a profit of over 30 million. On now, they were probably producing a profit that could be invested in players, possibly in excess of 100 million a year, if they didn't have the debt which was associated with the Glaziers acquisition. Of course, the Glaziers acquisition was funded by the club in the first place. So the cost of the Glaziers was nothing like the figures you described. They were costs that went against Manchester United.
Tom, and this is where I've picked up really that you're actually saying that the Glazers are gearing up to get the deficit down so that when the likes of Mourinho comes in, 70 odd million that's going away in interest at the moment is not going to be going that way. It's then going to be able to go to strengthen the team and make Man United the superpower in Europe, which they're not at the moment.
No. But you see, I take issue on that because when you buy your house, you put down a certain amount of equity, 20%, 30%, and you borrow from the bank and you have a mortgage.
If you're lucky nowadays.
Well, if you're lucky nowadays. But in those days, you could get a mortgage. And that's all the Glazers have done. It could be worse. You could have had Michael Knighton at Manchester United. What would he have done to that football club? You could look at Portsmouth. They've had 8 owners. One of them didn't exist. You know, you can't actually say, here is an owner, we don't like what he's done because he's leveraged the company. But that's what companies did when they purchased other companies. That's what they did in the city, surely. I mean, what have they done that's so heinous?
They haven't done anything. I'm not saying they have done anything that's heinous. All I'm saying is, if you were looking at it from the point of view of some of the fans groups, they would say the money that the Glazers have taken out could have gone into the club, into possibly even new areas of business, competing the way that, for example, if you look at the way that Manchester City are developing the Etihad complex all around, and you could argue that around Old Trafford, there was just similar kinds of potential. It could have gone into the club or into the transfer. But the Glaziers have been good owners. I mean, you know, I don't think Ferguson would have been a supporter of them if they were bad owners. I mean, you know, they're not in the same, anything like the same bracket as the owners. And let's be honest, I mean, you know, I support Everton. I think every Everton fan I know would have given their back teeth for the half the success that United have achieved in the era that the Glazers have probably controlled United. And I think that would probably be said for every other English football club and probably 90% of the clubs in Europe. But some fan groups would say we would have done that anyway with Alex Ferguson, and if we'd been able to use that funds that had gone to the Glazers and into debt. Because don't forget, United were completely debt-free before the Glaziers came in, and now it is heavily in debt, and they're having to do things like this. But I think I said earlier, it's a great business. It's also a great football club. I mean, you know, there's no two ways about it. But could it have been greater is the only question.
Professor Tom Cannon, thank you very much. In one word, are Manchester United on the right track?
They're on the track. Whether it's the right track, I think only time will tell. But the big question is, how will they stack up against the UEFA financial fair play rules, which is really the engine coming in the other direction of not only United, but Man City, Chelsea, PSV, and a whole host of other European giants.
That's the longest one word ever. Professor Tom Cannon, football finance expert.